What is up everybody, this is Mark from MJ Aquascaping, back again on the Be Rush Fresh YouTube channel with another video. Today we're talking about algae. I want to create a little mini series on this channel covering every single type of algae that you can get in a freshwater aquarium. Today we're talking about BBA, but let me know in the comments which algae you want me to cover next. So we're going to talk about why we get BBA, how we can prevent it, how we can remove it, but let's start with the basics. Let's start with what is BBA actually. So BBA is short for black brush algae or black beard algae, and this is one of the most common and also most stubborn types of algae that you can get in your aquarium. Now BBA gets its name from its appearance because it shows up as these really fluffy tufts that attach to your plants, to your hardscape or even to your equipment. And it kind of looks like a brush. Now it doesn't always have to be black though, it can range from a dark green color to grayish to black. And if you kill it, it will actually turn red. Of course I can immediately tell you how to kill BBA, but I think it's important that we first talk about why BBA appears in our aquarium. So we can either prevent it or make sure it doesn't come back after we kill it. So why do we get BBA? In a planted tank, BBA is usually related to issues with CO2. So either you're not using CO2, or your CO2 levels are fluctuating, or you're simply not injecting enough of it. Other factors that contribute to the growth of BBA is too much light, excess in nutrients, especially iron, and excess waste organics. So basically a dirty aquarium is more likely to get BBA. Now let's talk about the part that everybody wants to know. How do you remove BBA? So here you have a few options. First one is manual removal, but this one is my least favorite because BBA is very stubborn and it will really attach itself strongly to hardscape plants or equipment. If you just have a little bit of BBA here and there, of course you can take a brush, you can manually remove it. But BBA on plants, like, what are you going to do against that? You know, you can trim the plants, but yeah, that's about as much manual removal as you can do. So second option is chemicals, and here you have two products that you can use. First one is hydrogen peroxide, and the second one is something called glutaraldehyde. I think that's how you pronounce it. And this is an ingredient that can be found in products like Seachem XL, for example, or all those sort of liquid CO2 products or liquid carbon products. Those will usually contain some sort of form of glutaraldehyde, and that is very effective against black brush algae. And with both products you can either dose it directly in the water column, or you can spot dose it with a small syringe. A third option is to lower the water level and apply the chemical directly onto the algae with a small paintbrush, for example. This one is of course the most effective, but it's also the most dangerous because it's very easy to spill a little bit on a plant or on an animal. With the hydrogen peroxide, I would recommend to not use more than 20 milliliters per 100 liters on a daily basis. And with the glutaraldehyde, you could do a double dose. Like double the recommended dose is usually still fine, but I wouldn't go over that. Now, depending on which method you use, it might take a few days for the algae to turn red and die off. But once it turns red, it's actually more interesting for other fish and other inhabitants to eat it as well. So if the algae is still healthy and black or gray, they will not touch it, but once it turns red, somehow it's more interesting for them. If you don't want to use any chemicals, there's also a bit more eco-friendly way to get rid of BBA, and that is to use an algae cleanup group. I think here there's just two options. If you have a bigger tank, you can use these Siamese algae eaters. These guys are very good at eating BBA, especially when they're still young. If you have a nano tank, in that case I would recommend to use Cleathon snails. These snails are not as effective as the Siamese algae eater, but they still do a pretty good job, especially in large numbers. So now you know how to kill BBA, you know how to remove it. I think the last thing we should talk about is how to make sure the BBA is not coming back. Earlier I told you all the factors that can cause BBA, excess nutrients, too much light, CO2. Let's take a close look at those. And actually a lot of those factors also apply to different kinds of algae, so this part is important. So like I said earlier, BBA is usually related to some issues with CO2. So if you are injecting CO2, then first up, make sure you have a good quality regulator with a consistent bubble rate. Also make sure you have your CO2 on a timer so it switches on at least an hour before the lights turn on. Also make sure your filter is strong enough and bringing all that CO2 enriched water to every corner in your aquarium. And lastly, make sure you are using a CO2 drop checker so you can see if you are injecting enough CO2 in your aquarium. Now, if you think that your BBA issue is not related to CO2, then it's a good idea to have a look at your lighting, your fertilizers, or your maintenance. So too much light is another factor that will cause all types of algae, including BBA. So have a look at your light and see if the intensity might not be too much for your aquarium. Otherwise you might want to dim it, or if you can't dim your light, it's a good idea to use some floating plants. Also make sure that your lights are on a timer, so you have a consistent photo period every single day. Now, what is a good photo period? Again, that depends a little bit on the intensity, but for example, my tanks, I use pretty strong light, so I use an average of 6 to 8 hours per day. So if your lights are not as bright, you can go for a maximum of 10 hours, but I wouldn't go over that. Now, in my opinion, a lot of people dose way too much liquid fertilizer, and as a result, they get all kinds of algae, including BBA. There have been a lot of reports from people saying that their BBA stopped growing after they reduced or even stopped dosing iron fertilizer. Now, iron is a micronutrient and plants really don't need much of it, but a lot of people still think that their plants will be more colorful and more red if they dose a lot of iron. But if you look at my tanks, I don't want to brag, but my plants are pretty colorful and I don't dose any extra iron. I use a complete liquid fertilizer which has a tiny bit of iron. I think it's like 0.09%, so very little iron, but the plants look amazing. So if you are currently struggling with BBA and you are dosing extra iron, I would just give it a try, reduce it a little bit or just stop altogether, see how your plants react, see how the algae reacts, and I think it's going to be an improvement. Now, if CO2 is not the issue, if your light is not the issue, and you don't have an access to nutrients, then the last thing you could look at is your maintenance and the overall cleanliness of your aquarium. So are you doing maintenance regularly? Is your filtration adequate enough for the size of your tank? And if your aquarium is dirty, then that's going to raise your nitrate and your phosphate levels. And if those levels are out of balance, then at some point you're just going to get some algae issues. I could talk a whole lot more about maintenance and how to improve it, but I think this video is long enough already as it is. So the last thing I want to say is, if you do have some BBA, don't worry about it too much, especially in a new tank. It's completely normal. Unless, it's starting to grow rapidly or just look very unsightly, that's when I would take action and see if you can improve things. But just a little bit of it, it's completely normal. My tanks also have some BBA here and there, and sometimes it's just part of the ecosystem, So that's it for this first algae video on the BRS Fresh YouTube channel. Guys, thanks for watching, and let me know in the comments which algae I should cover next.